I only need a corner in the barn.
The mud had a particular way of clinging to things in Crestfall, Colorado. It was a heavy, sullen mud, the color of rust and regret, and it clung to wagon wheels and boot heels and the hems of dresses with a possessive greed. For 2 years, Clara Holt felt it had clung to her very soul. She stood on the back porch of the house her husband, Thomas, had built, and she looked out over the south pasture. From here, it almost looked right. The grass, coaxed by a week of spring sun, was a hopeful shade of green, but she knew the truth lay underneath. She knew the secret rot. The south water line, the one that fed the lower grazing fields from the creek, had collapsed somewhere along its buried length. No one could say precisely where. After every hard rain, or when the spring melt came down from the mountains, the pressure would build against the unseen blockage, and water would find its own way. It seeped and oozed, turning good pasture into a boggy, useless swamp that could lame a cow or swallow a calf. The rest of the pasture, starved of its steady supply, grew thin and parched by the time August rolled around. It was a slow death for a ranch, a death by 1,000 tiny drownings and 1,000 tiny thirsts. Clara Holt was 28 years old, and she had been a widow for 2 of them. Thomas had been a good man, a strong man, but a single winter fever had paid no mind to his strength. It had taken him and left her with the ranch, a ledger book that was getting harder to balance, and the suffocating pity of the town. She was a capable woman. She knew the land, knew the cattle. She knew the smell of the air before a storm and the feel of the soil in her hands. But she could not dig a quarter-mile trench by herself. 3 men had come to look at it. The first was a ranch hand from a spread over near Ridgeback, a man with hands like leather. He had nodded slowly. "Hard luck, ma'am," he'd said. "Dry seasons make the ground shift." He'd quoted her a price that would have required selling half her herd, then tipped his hat and ridden off. The second and third had been much the same. They'd walked the fence line, poked at the mud with the toe of a boot, and spoken of hard luck and the unpredictable nature of water. They'd offered sympathies. They'd offered advice she already knew. They had not offered to pick up a shovel. She knew why. She saw the way Mr. Henderson and Mr. Davies, whose sprawling ranches bordered hers to the east and the north, looked at her property when they rode the road into town. They didn't see a widow's struggle. They saw an opportunity. They saw acres they could absorb, a creek they could control. Land they called failing was land they were waiting to buy for pennies on the dollar. Their patience was a predator's patience, and her dwindling savings were its prey. So she stood on the porch, her hands clenched in the fabric of her apron, and watched the sun climb higher over the mountains. The air was clean and sharp, but all she could smell was the damp, decaying scent of failure. That was when she saw him. A rider, coming not from the town road but along the old track that followed her western fence. He was not a man she knew. He rode a sturdy-looking buckskin, and he sat in the saddle with an ease that spoke of a life spent on horseback. He wore no fancy gear, just dusty clothes and a hat pulled low. He looked like he was part of the landscape itself, weathered and quiet. A drifter. Her first instinct was a familiar clench of caution. A woman alone was a target. But he did not ride toward the house. He stopped at the fence line, right where the south pasture began its slow, soggy decline. He dismounted, tied his horse to a post, and just stood there. He wasn't looking at the house or at her. He was reading the land. He walked a few paces, his gaze sweeping from the high ground near the creek down to the marshy patch. He squatted, picking up a handful of soil, crumbling it between his fingers. He looked back up the slope, his head tilted as if listening for something she could not hear. It was the longest, most thorough inspection any man had given the problem, and he hadn't even been asked. Clara wiped her palms on her apron, her heart beating a little faster. She felt a strange flicker of hope, a thing so unfamiliar it was almost painful. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard, her boots making soft sounds in the dirt. She stopped a dozen yards from him, not wanting to spook a man who was so clearly lost in thought. He must have sensed her, because he stood up slowly, dusting the soil from his hands. He turned, and she saw his face for the first time. It was a plain-spoken face, not handsome in the way of town boys, but solid. Lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. A jaw that looked like it knew how to set itself. His eyes were a calm, steady gray. He took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and gravelly, like stones rolling in a slow river. "You're on private property," she said. The words came out sharper than she intended, a habit born of 2 years of guarding her borders. He did not take offense. He simply nodded. "I know it. Eli Cross. My horse needed water. I saw your creek. The creek's open to travelers," she said, softening her tone. "There's a trough by the barn. Appreciate it." He put his hat back on, but he didn't move toward the barn. His gaze went back to the pasture. "You got a collapsed line," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara crossed her arms. "I'm aware. It's not the main pipe," he went on, his voice still quiet, thoughtful. "The break's about 100 yards down from the intake valve. See how the ground dips there? And the way that patch of clover is growing? It's getting just enough seepage to thrive, while everything below it is either drowned or drying up. The pressure is forcing the water out sideways into that low basin." He pointed. "You're losing it all right there." He had seen in 5 minutes what the other men had pretended not to. He had read the story the land was telling. She waited. Here it came. The part where he named his price. The part where he saw the desperation in her eyes and turned it into dollars. The other men who looked at it said it was hard luck, she said, her voice tight. "It's not luck," he said simply. "It's clay. The soil shifts. An old pipe gives way. It's just a job of work. A job of work." The words hung in the air between them, simple and true. "And what's the price for such a job of work, Mr. Cross?" she asked, bracing herself. He looked at her then, a direct and steady gaze. He seemed to take in the determined set of her jaw, the weariness in her eyes she was sure she could not hide. He looked at the house, the barn, the whole struggling enterprise. "I only ask for a place in the barn," he said, "and water for my horse. Maybe a hot meal if it's offered. I'm heading north, but my horse could use the rest, and I prefer to earn my keep." Clara stared at him. She had been prepared for greed, for opportunism. She was not prepared for this. It made no sense. A man with his knowledge could command a high wage. "You'd do that much work for a bed of hay?" she asked, suspicion warring with a desperate, foolish hope. "I've slept on worse," he said. A corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. "And a man's hands get idle when he's traveling too long." She was not going to be the one to say any of this first. She had learned to be cautious. But she was also a woman running out of time. Henderson and Davies were not going to wait forever. The bank was not going to wait forever. She looked from his steady gray eyes to his capable, calloused hands. She looked at the pasture that was bleeding her future away. "The barn is dry," she said, "and the hay is clean. Supper is at 6. He waited. "You can start in the morning," she added. Eli Cross simply nodded, as if this were the most natural transaction in the world. "Thank you, ma'am." He turned, untied his horse, and led it toward the barn, his steps even and unhurried. Clara stood there for a long time, watching him go. The sun felt warm on her face. For the first time in 2 years, it did not feel like a judgment. The next morning, she was up before dawn, stoking the fire in the cook stove. She made coffee, strong and black, and a stack of pancakes. She was frying bacon when she heard the sound. A rhythmic, metallic scrape. She went to the back door and looked out. In the pale pre-dawn light, a figure was already at work. Eli Cross had found the old shovel and pickaxe in the lean-to, and he was standing exactly where he had pointed the day before, 100 yards from the creek. He had already marked a line in the dirt with his boot heel. As she watched, he lifted the pickaxe high and brought it down, the sound of steel biting into hard-packed earth ringing sharp and clear in the morning air. He worked like a man who understood economy of motion. There were no wasted swings, no needless steps. Each movement was deliberate, powerful, and effective. He was not working fast, he was working steady. It was the way a man worked when he planned to finish a job, not just start one. She poured a mug of coffee, added a splash of milk the way Thomas had liked it, and carried it out to him. He heard her coming and stopped, leaning the pickaxe against his leg. His forehead was already damp with sweat. "Brought you coffee," she said, holding out the mug. "Obliged," he said, taking it. His fingers brushed hers, and she felt the rough, calloused texture of his skin. He drank the coffee in long, slow swallows, his eyes on the line he had drawn. "This is where you think it is?" she asked. "This is where we start digging," he corrected gently. "The ground will tell us the rest of the story." And so began the rhythm of their days. Every morning, Eli was in the trench before the sun cleared the mountains. He dug with a relentless persistence that seemed to draw strength from the earth itself. Clara would go about her chores, milking the 2 cows, feeding the chickens, tending her vegetable garden, but her eyes were always drawn back to the lone figure in the field. She watched the way he held the shovel, the solid planting of his feet, the straight line of his back. She watched him stop, squint at the sun, and then bend to the task again. He was a quiet man. In the first few days, they barely spoke. She would bring him water at midday and a plate of food. He would stop, eat, and thank her with a nod. Then he would return to the ditch. It was a shared quiet, at first born of the distance between a lonely widow and a silent drifter. But slowly, it began to change. One afternoon, he called her over. "Ma'am, you know this land better than I do. About 10 feet from here, the soil changes, gets rockier. Am I remembering the lay of it right?" She walked to the edge of the trench he was carving, a deep, neat scar in the green pasture. "It does," she confirmed. "There's a shelf of shale that runs through here. Thomas always had to plow around it." Eli nodded, a look of concentration on his face. "Figured. We'll need to go deeper here to lay the new pipe below the frost line, but the shale will make it slow going." He didn't complain. He just stated it as a fact, a problem to be solved. From then on, he asked her questions. He respected her knowledge. He listened when she spoke about the way the water pooled after a thunderstorm or the patch of ground that never seemed to dry out. They were conversations held over the edge of a deepening ditch, their words practical, their topics grounded in soil and rock and water. She started leaving a full jug of water under the shade of the lone cottonwood tree instead of carrying out single glasses. One evening, she found the loose hinge on the chicken coop door had been tightened, the wood around it reinforced with a small, neat piece of scrap metal. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him for it. The gesture sat between them, a solid, unspoken thing. A week turned into 2. The trench grew, a testament to his steady labor. It snaked across the pasture, straight and true. The pile of excavated dirt alongside it grew taller than a man. Townspeople on their way to Crestfall would slow their buggies, staring at the immense undertaking. Clara could feel their curiosity, their speculation. The widow Holt had hired a single hand, doing the work of 3. One Saturday, she had to ride into town for supplies. As she tied her horse to the hitching post outside Gable's general store, she saw Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Davies speaking in low, urgent tones by the church. They stopped talking when they saw her, offering tight, thin smiles that did not reach their eyes. Inside the store, the air was thick with the scent of coffee beans, canvas, and gossip. Mr. Gable, a kindly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, weighed out her flour and beans. "Here you've got some work being done out at your place, Clara," he said, his voice low. "I do," she said, keeping her tone even. "Man's a hard worker, from what I hear," Gable continued, not looking at her as he scooped coffee beans into a paper bag. "Town's taken notice. He earns his keep. Mister." Gable finished with the beans and folded the top of the bag with meticulous care. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't meddle. You know I don't. But some things a man can't keep quiet about." She waited, her hand resting on a bolt of calico. "That first fellow you had out, the one from Ridgeback? He was in here the week after he saw you. Bought a new bridle. Henderson was in that same day. They talked by the Cracker Barrel for near an hour. I didn't think nothing of it." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "Then that second man came, the one from the valley. A few days later, he's in town. And who comes in right after him? Davies. They spoke over by the harness leather. Quiet like. A cold stillness settled over Clara. And the third one, Mr. Gable said, his voice dropping further. Same story. He came, he left. And the next Saturday, Henderson and Davies were both in here, talking to that land broker from Denver who passes through every month or so. They were looking at maps, Clara. Maps that had your property lines drawn on them. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a slammed door. It wasn't just that the men had refused the job. It was a coordinated effort. They had been sent, or at least encouraged, to inspect the damage, confirm it was too much for her to handle, and report back. They were systematically confirming her ranch was doomed, building a case for their inevitable lowball offer. The hard luck and dry seasons were just the script they'd been given. Clara paid for her supplies, her movements stiff and automatic. She thanked Mr. Gable with a nod, unable to trust her voice. The ride home was a blur. The wind whipped strands of hair from her bun, but she didn't feel it. A hot, clean anger burned in her chest, cauterizing the last 2 years of sorrow and self-doubt. They had counted on her being weak. They had counted on her being scared. They had counted on her being alone. And then another thought, sharp and clear, cut through the rage. Eli Cross had arrived in Crestfall the night before he came to her ranch. He would have stayed at the saloon, the only place for a traveler to get a bed. He would have been there. He would have heard the whispers, the boasts, the casual cruelty of men who thought no one was listening. He had heard them scheming. He had known what they were doing. And he hadn't used that knowledge to frighten her into hiring him. He hadn't used it to inflate his price. He had ridden out to her fence line, read the truth in the land, and offered to fix it for a place in the barn. He had given her the one thing no one else had, a fair chance. Her anger did not land on Eli. It settled instead into a deep, quiet reservoir of gratitude that was so immense it almost frightened her. He had seen the jackal circling and had, without a word, chosen to stand with the lamb. When she rode into the yard, the sun was low, painting the mountains in hues of orange and purple. Eli was not in the trench. He was standing by the half-finished work, wiping his face with a rag. He looked tired, but it was the good tired of a man who has done a hard day's labor. She dismounted, leaving the supplies on the horse. She walked toward him, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. He saw her coming and his posture straightened, a question in his eyes. She stopped a few feet from him. The air was cool and smelled of earth. "I was in town," she said. Her voice was steady. He just nodded, waiting. "Mr. Gable told me about Henderson and Davies," she said, watching his face. "He told me about the land broker." There was no flicker of surprise in his eyes. no denial, only a quiet stillness. He looked away from her, his gaze settling on the distant peaks. "I was in the saloon my first night in town," he said, his voice low. "Men get to talking when they drink. They don't always notice who's in the corner." So it was true. He had known all along. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question. He turned back to her, and his gray eyes were serious. "Wasn't my place?" he said. "And it might have sounded like I was trying to scare you into giving me work. I figured it was better to just do the work. Let you see it could be done. A problem you can fix isn't a disaster. It's just a problem. A problem you can fix." The simple logic of it settled into her bones. For 2 years, she had been living with a disaster. He had looked at it and seen only a problem. They stood in the gathering twilight, the silence stretching between them, no longer awkward or uncertain, but filled with the weight of everything that had just been said and all that had not. The trench he had dug lay between them like a promise. "You're a good man, Eli Cross," she said, the words coming out softer than she intended. He looked down at his boots, then back at her. A faint flush crept up his neck. "I'm just a man who knows how to dig a ditch, ma'am." "My name is Clara," she said. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes beyond quiet competence. A flicker of warmth, a hint of something vulnerable. "Clara," he repeated, trying the name out. It sounded right in his low voice. The work was almost done. The collapsed section of the old clay pipe had been exposed, a mess of cracked and broken pottery. The new iron pipe, purchased with the last of her savings on a hopeful trip to Denver she'd made last week, lay in sections along the trench. The end was in sight. Soon the water would flow again, clean and contained. Soon the pasture would heal, and Eli Cross would have no more reason to stay. His horse was rested. He had earned his keep 100 times over. He was a drifter heading north. The thought sent a pang of loss through her so sharp it took her breath away. She was not going to let this slip away. Not after everything. She had been patient. She had endured. Now it was time for a different kind of courage. "When the work is done," she began, her voice shaking only slightly, "the barn will feel empty." It was a clumsy start, not what she had planned to say at all. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. He waited. She took a breath. "I was hoping," she said, her voice clearer now, stronger. "I was hoping you might find a reason to stay." It was a gamble. A woman didn't say such things. A woman waited to be asked, to be chosen. But she was done waiting. Eli stood very still. The evening breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood tree. He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He was so close she could see the flecks of gray and blue in his eyes. He smelled of soap and sweat and honest work. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take the shovel that was still leaning against the side of the trench. He laid it carefully on the ground, as if setting aside the tools of his trade. When he looked back at her, his face was stripped bare of its usual reserve. It was filled with a sincerity so profound it made her heart ache. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been slow. I know I have. A man like me, he gets used to moving on. He forgets how to look for a reason to stay." He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into deep water. "I would like to stay," he said, the words simple and direct. "Not in the barn. I would like to stay in the house, Clara. As your husband." He did not say he loved her. He did not offer poetry or grand promises. He offered himself. He offered a future, as plain-spoken and solid as he was. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. of a joy so deep it felt like coming home after a long and difficult journey. "It took you long enough," she whispered, a smile breaking through the tears. A true, wide smile finally broke across his face, transforming his serious features. "Yes," he said. "Both, I expect." He reached out then, and his calloused, capable hands gently cupped her face. He was not a man of many words, but his touch spoke volumes. It spoke of respect, of tenderness, of a shared future built not on grand declarations, but on the solid ground of a job well done. Their courtship was less a beginning and more a continuation. The work on the waterline was finished together, Eli lowering the heavy iron pipes and Clara handing him the tools, their movements synchronized in a silent, practiced dance. The day the water was finally diverted, they stood side by side and watched it rush through the new channel, a clean, strong current heading exactly where it was supposed to go. It felt like a victory they had both earned. The shared meals moved from the porch steps to the kitchen table. The conversations shifted from soil and shale to dreams and histories. He told her of the places he had been, the jobs he had worked. She told him about Thomas, about her parents, about her deep, abiding love for a ranch that had almost broken her. They were discovering the landscape of each other and finding it as rich and compelling as the land they both now tended. They were married on a sunny Tuesday in June in the small church in Crestfall. Clara wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself. Eli wore a new shirt and a jacket he had bought from Mr. Gable, who beamed at them from the front pew like a proud father. The whole town seemed to be there. They brought small practical gifts, a jar of preserves, a new set of dish towels, a hand-forged hoof pick. It was their way of giving their blessing, of welcoming the quiet drifter into the fold. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Davies were not there. The wedding was short. The preacher spoke of partnership and perseverance. But the truest vows had already been exchanged over the edge of a ditch in the fading light of a spring evening. 3 years later, the south pasture was a sea of lush, green grass. The cattle that grazed on it were fat and healthy. The Holt Ranch, now the Cross Ranch, according to the new sign Eli had carved and hung over the gate, was thriving. Clara sat on the porch swing, the same one she had stood near on that desperate morning 3 years ago. The chains no longer squeaked, Eli had oiled them. A sleeping baby boy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's steady gaze, was nestled in her arms. A 2-year-old girl with a tangle of blonde curls was determinedly trying to climb the porch steps, her small face a mask of concentration. Eli came up from the barn, walking with that same even, unhurried pace. He was no longer a drifter. He was a man rooted to this place, to this family. He sat down beside Clara on the swing, and it settled into a gentle, rhythmic motion. He smelled of hay and horses and home. He leaned over and kissed the top of the baby's head. "He's sleeping well," he said. "He's a good baby," Clara said, leaning her head against her husband's solid shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their daughter finally conquer the top step and clap her hands in triumph. In the distance, on the main road, 2 riders were passing. They slowed their horses, their gazes fixed on the verdant fields and the healthy herd. Henderson and Davies. They looked, their faces hard to read from this distance, then spurred their horses on without stopping. They never stopped anymore. Eli's arm came around Clara, his hand resting on her shoulder. "They still look," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let them look," Clara said. "It's a good view." He smiled, that slow, quiet smile that was still reserved mostly for her. "That it is." He looked from the fields to the house, to the little girl on the steps, to the baby in her arms, and finally to her. "That it is." Patience was a virtue, they said. But sometimes, patience was just a form of waiting for what you already knew was yours. The real virtue was in the knowing. in seeing the value beneath the surface, whether in a patch of broken land or a quiet, steady man. The world was full of men who saw only the failure, the flaw, the opportunity for gain. But a rare few could see the foundation, the potential, the job of work that just needed doing. That was a kind of love too, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds a home and a life on solid ground.